What's going on, guys? So I am out here in Las Vegas at the Venetian in one of their giant convention centers, and we are touring a bunch of units. So Jayco invited us out to take a look at their 2025 model lineup. This is mainly a dealer show. This is where they invite a lot of their dealers to come look at what's new, what they might want to stock on their lot, and specifically the upgrades, enhancements, and changes for each model year. Now, the topic of this video is going to be a little different because there's a lot of folks who might watch this video and use this as a reference tool on what RV floor plan they're looking for. But before we do that, let's take things all the way back to basics and talk about some of the differences in different types of RVs and what you may be looking for, what you may not be looking for. Hang tight, I'll be right back. Okay, so first and foremost, using the inventory out here, I'm going to go over what I consider to be the different levels of RVs from an affordability perspective, and I think some people may actually say from an entry level to an experience level perspective, but I can't really say that because there are a lot of folks who have a stick and tin unit. Some people may consider it to be entry level, but some people may consider it to be expert level if they've been using it for a long time and they just have experience with it and they have knowledge on how to do repairs. And like I said, just they use it more than people with higher end associated units. So what we're really going to talk about is what your money gets you with different types of units. So when we look at this with this corrugated sidewall, and there's several different flavors of a corrugated sidewall, this is called a stick and tin unit. This is because the steel frame that's underneath it has wooden studs behind these walls, and this right here is an aluminum outside sheeting, very similar to aluminum you might put on your home. Now, why do they call it stick and tin? Wood with aluminum, right? It's the two materials merging together. These are typically a little heavier but a little less expensive than your fiberglass walled units. Now, just because a unit may be fiberglass does not mean that they're using aluminum behind that fiberglass. So you can look at units like this one, and this one may have a steel frame behind it, but just as an example, you can look at a unit like this and think that you don't have a stick wall built behind there like you do with these. These are always going to be a stick wall behind here. And I've learned a lot in the last several years about the actual construction of these. And even though some folks may think that these are built like in a more shoddy fashion, if you saw the amount of lumber and bracing and wood structure that goes into these, you would probably actually come away thinking that these are going to be stronger than the aluminum walled with fiberglass sheathed RVs. Now, the next step up in a price category from a stick and tin like this is typically a fiberglass over stick construction, which means it's a wood stud, but they put fiberglass, smooth fiberglass on the outside. They call this a smooth walled unit. Now, a smooth walled unit, again, is more indicative of what people consider to be an upgrade over stick and tin. One thing to keep in mind though, this type of sidewall will always be more repairable and serviceable than this type of sidewall, any way you slice it. You can remove the panels from here, you can get behind them and you can work on them, and you can't do that on these. This is a much more detailed, more intricate, and more time-consuming process to repair if you ever damage the sidewall. The other thing to think about as well is if you get moisture or anything behind the wall here, it's a lot easier to access to fix those problems than it would be on a fiberglass unit. That's why a lot of folks that have fiberglass units look for a backer called Asdel, a composite wall material that's basically behind this fiberglass. It's sandwiched together, that's impervious to water. Because if you ever get water in the sidewall, it's going to start doing damage if there's wood back there. Anytime wood in an RV comes in contact with water, you have the potential for damage. What's nice about stick and tin units is inherently in their design, they tend to kind of ventilate themselves a little bit. They don't hold water as much as a fiberglass unit might if it has a wood backer to it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, when we talk about price point, just because it's stick and tin doesn't mean it's always going to be less expensive than one that has a smooth wall. And what I mean by that is if you look at two models, and this one right here is kind of a good example. This is a smooth wall fiberglass unit. It's very long. This unit is probably 34 to 36 feet long. It is an absolutely huge towable travel trailer. And then when you look at this one right here, it's a relatively short stick and tin unit. If you look at an incredibly long stick and tin unit, like this one behind me right here, this one is probably going to cost more than a shorter version of this. So let's just hypothetically say that this one right here has an MSRP of around $56,000 and a sale price of around, let's just say $40,000. And if you had a shorter version of something like this, maybe 25 feet long, it might have a similar MSRP and a similar sale price, but you're going to get more footage for the price with the stick and tin almost every time versus a fiberglass or smooth walled unit. Now that said, as we keep going through these, the more luxury amenities that are baked in, the more technology that's baked in also dictates price. But from a starting point for you to think about, yes, stick and tin units like this are typically going to be less expensive than an equivalent fiberglass walled unit. Okay, so now that we've talked about the affordability aspect of stick and tin units and the serviceability, the ability for you to kind of get into that sidewall if you need to do repairs, let's focus on what happens if you don't get a stick and tin unit and you opt for a fiberglass. Now we're passing by some fifth wheels right now, but we're gonna get to some towable travel trailers up here in a second that are fiberglass units on steel construction. Okay, now we're looking at fiberglass walled units. These are all going to have aluminum frame construction, which means behind the walls it's going to be an aluminum stud work. And again, that does not mean that having aluminum studs is stronger than wood studs. Oftentimes, the aluminum is spaced out much greater, and there's foam insulation versus residential batted insulation. And the wood that you see in wood-studded RVs is typically like 16 inches on center, so they are heavier and there's a lot more structure behind them. And it's also less expensive. But let's talk about aluminum with fiberglass or smooth fiberglass on top of them. Now, these two units are going to look very similar to each other. They're both J-feather units. Why would one cost more than the other if the floor plans are very similar? That's where cosmetics and amenities really come into play. You can see that the front of this unit has a really nice formed or molded fiberglass front cap, a lot of LED lighting, but then we can walk over to another unit that is also in the same J-feather lineup, and it may not have that type of front cap to it. It may have a much simpler front cap to it, like this one right here. This J-feather, and you can tell right off the bat, the graphics are a little bit different, but it's going to have a more basic front end to it. So this just has the fiberglass that wraps around the front. It still has some LED accent lights and things like that, but when you compare this front cap to that front cap, you can certainly see the difference. And there's going to be a cost difference there as well. This one right here is going to be significantly more expensive, not just because of that, but because of some of the other amenities that come into a package that they put more cosmetic attention into than a unit like this. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. This right here is definitely the more affordable way to wrap the front of your RV. Basically, they take the fiberglass from the top and they wrap it around to the front, and it's reliable. It works really, really well, especially when you have a material like Azdel as your backer, because you can't get water into this. I know everyone's seen those old RVs that sometimes have big bubble spots where it looks like all of this is delaminating from the backing material, and that's a real concern. So a lot of manufacturers have switched to using Azdel on the interior and the exterior sheathing underneath this because it prevents that from happening. So it's always good to look for RVs that utilize technology that helps prevent water from getting into walls and creating damage spots. And again, RVs that use Azdel brag about it. They'll put stickers on their units, they'll label it, they'll tell you that they use Azdel in different areas, and it is always important to see that. Like right here, it actually says Azdel on the interior and exterior. Very cool. It is a US made product. So I always look for it. I'm a big fan of Azdel. Some RV manufacturers don't use it. If their construction technology and techniques are so solid that they never have to worry about water getting into the sidewall, then it's not that big of a deal. And some of your hyper luxury brands like Lux, even though a lot of them are now switching to using Azdel, but these super high-end brands, if they do like a hung sidewall, or if they really concentrate on making sure that everything that could lead to water possibly getting into the sidewall is taken care of, then in some cases they don't need to use it. But for the most part, I'm a big fan of Azdel. Now, this is going to be part one of this video. Part two, we're going to focus on fifth wheels, and we're going to talk about kind of the next step up budgetary wise. But before we end this video, all of the ones that I've shown you here are 3/4 ton and below towable. What I mean by that is when we look at the size of some of these RVs like this one in front of us, this one's probably going to have about an 8,000 pound gross vehicle weight rating, which is the weight of the RV when fully loaded to capacity. That's what the manufacturer says you can load this thing up to, but do not exceed, and that's going to be your max weight that this thing should ever weigh going down the road at any given time. And even then, you need to be very careful of what that weight consists of. Is it water in the tanks? Is it storage up front? Is it extra furniture that you've put in there? Is it a heavier mattress? What constitutes that gross vehicle weight rating of your RV? And when I say everything I've talked about so far is 3/4 ton towable and below, it doesn't mean that this is towable by a 1/2 ton truck or a 1/4 ton truck. It does not mean that you can hook your Canyon or Colorado or your F-150 up to something like this and feel safe towing it down the road, because this, in its configuration as it sits right now, is probably going to create a pretty sketchy towing experience for most of you all with a 1/2 ton truck. I would not recommend towing something this big with a 1/2 ton truck. My recommendations for 1/2 ton towing have always been a gross vehicle weight rating, which is clearly going to be designated on the sticker on the other side of the RV over here, but to specifically stay under 6,500 pounds regardless of the package you have on your truck. Basically, we're trying to mitigate the amount of force and energy that's being applied to the back of the truck, bouncing up and down on the truck and moving whenever you're driving down the road, and creating a potential sway issue or a potential accident. So that's my recommendation. Whether or not you agree with it, that's entirely up to you, but that is the recommendation I usually give. And even at that weight rating, you need to be very careful how you tow an RV. Make sure you use a proper weight distribution hitch, make sure it's set up properly, make sure you've weighted and balanced your RV appropriately. You don't have too much weight in the back, you have it balanced out so you're transitioning the right amount of weight to the right areas with your hitch when properly set up. Something like this, in my opinion, though, is 3/4 ton truck towable, and you still want to have a properly set up weight distribution hitch with sway control. It's just going to make it that much safer when you're going down the road. Everything else I'm going to talk about in here, you know, it's going to borderline the top highest payload package 3/4 ton trucks on the road. But most cases, you're going to want to tow any of these with at least, at minimum, a single rear wheel 1 ton truck. But the next video, we're talking about 5th wheels. Guys, I sure hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.